Today I'm going to talk about the deadliest aviation accident in Greek history, the Helios Airways Flight 522 incident, also known as the Ghost Flight. It occurred in 2005. A Boeing 737 suddenly lost contact with the ground 13 minutes after takeoff, but it continued flying along its planned route on autopilot. The plane did not land at its scheduled airport in Athens and kept flying completely unresponsive. The Greek government sent 2 fighter jets to intercept the aircraft. When they approached, they saw the chilling sight. All the passengers and crew were unconscious, wearing their oxygen masks. Then, a man suddenly emerged from the cockpit and sat in the captain's seat. The plane turned sharply to the left and flew north, and not long after, it crashed 32 kilometers north of Athens. But what really caused this tragedy? Let's return to 2005 and uncover what happened. The 14th of August, 2005. It was a sunny weekend. Helios Airways Flight 522 was already waiting for takeoff at Larnaca International Airport in Cyprus. The flight was scheduled to take off at 9 a.m., arrive in Athens at 10:45 a.m., and reach its final destination, Prague, at 1:10 p.m. The total flight time was 4 hours and 10 minutes, with 115 passengers and 6 crew members on board. Because it was the tourist season in Cyprus, Helios Airways had hired a German captain, 59-year-old Hans-Jürgen Merten, who had flown for the company for 5 months the previous year. He had 16,900 flight hours, including 5,500 hours, on a Boeing 737. The co-pilot was 51-year-old Cypriot pilot Pampos Charalambos, with 7,549 flight hours. Both were highly experienced. As usual, Flight 522 received clearance and took off at 9:07 a.m. By 9:11 a.m., the plane began climbing, and at 9:12 a.m., as it passed through an altitude of 12,040 feet, the cabin altitude warning horn sounded. Both the captain and co-pilot believed it was a takeoff configuration warning, which normally only occurs while the plane is on the runway, indicating that something was wrong. A few minutes later, alerts for the cooling system and the main air warning sounded. At this point, the captain was not aware that the cabin oxygen masks had deployed. At 9:14 a.m., Captain Hans contacted air traffic control to report the problem, and the operations center immediately called the duty ground engineer to assist. The captain repeatedly reported that the cooling fan light had gone out, but when the engineer asked, "Can you confirm that the pressurization panel is set to auto?" the captain did not answer. After a while, he asked, "Where is my cooling circuit breaker?" At 9:20 a.m., the conversation between the captain and ground engineer ended. At 9:23 a.m., the aircraft was expected to reach 34,000 feet and continue the flight on autopilot. At 9:37 a.m., the plane entered Greek airspace. Nicosia Air Traffic Control told Athens ATC that they had lost radio contact with Flight 522, but radar still showed the plane flying over the Mediterranean along its original route toward Athens. Helios Airways Flight 522 did not land at Athens International Airport and remained at its cruising altitude of about 34,000 feet over Greek airspace. Between 10:12 a.m. to 10:50 a.m., Athens ATC tried to contact the aircraft 19 times, but received no response. Less than 4 years after the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States, and with Flight 522 out of contact with air traffic control for over an hour, authorities feared the plane might have been hijacked. Athens, the capital of Greece, has a population of over 3 million, and if the aircraft had crashed in the city, the consequences could have been catastrophic. The Greek government immediately began formulating a response plan. At 10:55 a.m., the Greek military ordered 2 F-16 fighter jets to investigate the situation. At 11:24 a.m., the jets caught up with Flight 522. One remained behind the aircraft, ready to take action if necessary, while the other flew around the plane for reconnaissance. The fighter pilots reported that the plane was undamaged. The captain in the cockpit was unresponsive, and the co-pilot appeared incapacitated. The cabin was dark, with sunlight streaming in through some windows. Oxygen masks had deployed, and passengers sat motionless in their seats. There were no signs of terrorism. At 11:49 a.m., the fighter pilot reportedly observed a man in a light blue shirt entering the cockpit. He allegedly sat upright in the captain's seat and put on headphones. The plane then sharply turned left and flew north. A few minutes later, Flight 522 crashed. The crash drew worldwide attention, and the media reported the strange incident. Due to the mysterious circumstances and the story of the man in the cockpit, the flight became known as the Ghost Flight. After the crash, the Greek government dispatched 35 fire trucks, 3 helicopters, and numerous ambulances to the site to rescue victims and extinguish the fire caused by the explosion. The plane crashed tail first, and the fuselage came to a stop after rolling about 500 meters. Apart from the tail and cockpit, the rest of the aircraft was almost completely shattered. All 121 people on board were killed. The severely damaged black box was sent to Paris for analysis, and victims' bodies were taken to hospitals for identification. Later, the chief inspector in charge of the crash reported that all passengers still had breath and a heartbeat before impact. They did not die from hypoxia or freezing. The main cause of death was the crash. This conclusion added a mysterious and tragic element to the incident. Later, the investigation team released important clues and reports and conducted a flight simulation to reconstruct the incident. On the 14th of August 2005, a few hours before Flight 522 took off, the crew noticed frost around the rear door and unusual noises, so they requested the company to thoroughly inspect the cabin door. The inspection was carried out by a ground engineer, who was the last person to speak with the captain before takeoff. After a series of tests, the engineer concluded that the cabin door did not leak air or make abnormal sounds, and he signed the technical log. At the crash site, investigators found a control panel in the wreckage which became a key breakthrough. Modern commercial aircraft are equipped with a cabin pressurization control system which has 2 modes, automatic and manual. The higher the plane climbs, the thinner the air. The cabin must be pressurized to ensure that the crew and passengers can breathe normally. Without pressurization, flying at high altitude is like a mountaineer climbing Mount Everest without an oxygen bottle. During flight, the pressurization system is usually in automatic mode, which adjusts cabin pressure according to altitude. To maintain air circulation, oxygen levels, and pressure balance, the rear of the plane also has a small outflow valve. If the cabin is not sealed properly and air leaks, it can endanger flight safety and even cause flight failure. Investigators confirmed that the pressurization control switch had been left in manual mode. This meant the ground engineer did not follow the normal pressurization procedure, which requires switching to manual mode for inspection and then back to automatic after checks. But the switch had been left in manual mode, which was a very serious problem. It is likely that nobody realized this after takeoff. Was the crash really caused by leaving the pressurization system in manual mode? At this point, the black box became extremely important. Since the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States in 2001, cockpit security had been strengthened. Flight 522 cockpit door was equipped with a secure lock, which could only be opened from the inside by the pilots or from the outside by someone who knew the code. DNA testing and analysis of the cockpit voice recorder in the black box confirmed that the man who entered the cockpit at the time was not a hijacker. One of the 6 crew members, a male flight attendant named Andreas Prodromou, entered the cockpit password at 11:48 a.m. He sat in the captain's seat, and in less than a minute, the plane's left engine ran out of fuel, causing the aircraft to suddenly turn left and begin descending. The irregular flight trajectory confirmed that Andreas had attempted to manually control the plane. At 11:54 a.m., the cockpit voice recorder captured him making a Mayday call. Mayday is an international radio distress signal used when a pilot faces an immediate life-threatening emergency. It must be repeated 3 times to ensure it is heard clearly, because the plane's radio was still tuned to the Cyprus frequency from takeoff. Athens ATC did not hear his call. At 11:59 a.m., Flight 522 suddenly changed direction and flew southwest because the right engine had also run out of fuel. The plane's altitude dropped rapidly until it crashed heavily on the ground. Based on these clues, the investigation team concluded that the crash was not caused by a terrorist suicide attack. It is highly likely that cabin depressurization caused oxygen deprivation, leading to this tragic accident. To verify their conclusions, the investigators conducted simulation experiments. After 4 months, the accident investigation team conducted a simulation using the same aircraft model, the same flight route, and the same takeoff time. Following the procedures recorded in the black box, the plane was operated in the same way. the simulation confirmed that about 5 minutes after takeoff, a warning alarm sounded in the cockpit. This was caused by cabin pressurization, not the takeoff configuration warning, as the captain initially believed. On this aircraft, the two alarms sound identical, making them difficult to distinguish. Shortly afterward, the plane's cooling equipment and main alarm also triggered. The captain assumed there was a problem with the air conditioning system, partly because this system had experienced issues before and had even been repaired prior to takeoff. That's why he asked, "Where is my coolant?" In reality, there was no high temperature. The alarms were simply side effects of cabin pressurization. Meanwhile, the pressurization system had been left in manual mode, so it could not automatically maintain cabin pressure. As the plane climbed rapidly, the air inside the cabin became thin. At around 18,000 feet, the passengers' oxygen masks deployed automatically, allowing them to breathe while waiting for the cockpit danger to be resolved. However, cockpit oxygen masks do not deploy automatically, so the pilots had not yet recognized the problem. As the plane continued climbing, normal people exposed to 10,000 meters altitude have only about 50 seconds of effective consciousness. It is speculated that the captain, experiencing hypoxia, got up to check the coolant in the cockpit and then passed out, while the co-pilot also became incapacitated. With both pilots unconscious, the plane continued to climb to around 34,000 feet, entering autopilot mode and following its preset route. Passengers in the cabin were unaware of the situation. About 12 minutes later, the oxygen in the masks was depleted, and the passengers also lost consciousness. This type of Boeing 737 is equipped with an emergency oxygen system designed only to handle sudden cabin depressurization. After the oxygen supply is depleted, the aircraft would normally descend to a lower altitude, about 10,000 feet, where passengers and crew can breathe normally without supplemental oxygen. This explains why passengers were found wearing oxygen masks, seemingly asleep. When the plane reached the area near Athens International Airport, it continued circling in the sky because no one was controlling it. This is why the aircraft remained in a holding pattern. The simulation experiments confirmed this sequence of events. A year after the crash, Helios Airways had several bank accounts frozen by the Cypriot government, which eventually led to the airline shutting down. The Greek government later released the official report on Helios Flight 522. The report detailed that the deadliest air disaster in Greek history was caused by a series of crew errors. Specifically, the pressurization system was left in manual mode, causing the cabin depressurization. Although the report explains the cause of the accident, some questions remain unresolved. Why did everyone in the cabin fall unconscious, yet a few individuals remained awake several hours after takeoff? The last conscious person to appear in the cockpit was a flight attendant named Andreas. It is said that he had switched shifts with another crew member so he could work on the same flight as his girlfriend, who was also a flight attendant. Andreas had another identity as well. He was a trained diver and a former Special Forces soldier with excellent physical endurance. He also held a UK commercial pilot license and had completed more than 200 hours of flight training. Though he had never been trained to fly a large jet like the Boeing 737. Investigators later speculated that Andreas realized something was wrong and, unable to contact the cockpit, decided to take action before the oxygen from the cabin masks ran out. He found a portable oxygen bottle, one of 4 on the aircraft, each capable of supplying oxygen for over an hour. At the crash site, all 4 bottles were recovered, and 3 had been used, explaining why Andreas remained conscious long after others had fallen unconscious. It is also possible that his girlfriend was awake during this time as well. He may have gone to the cockpit more than once. During the investigation, DNA belonging to the first officer was found on a cockpit oxygen mask, leading to the speculation that Andreas had tried to revive him but was unsuccessful. Realizing time was running out, Andreas finally entered the cockpit and took the captain's seat. He attempted to disengage autopilot and call for help, but it was already too late. According to the F-16 fighter pilots who intercepted the aircraft, as well as the crash marks on the ground, the inexperienced Andreas was still trying to keep the fuselage level in the final moments to soften the impact. But under such extreme conditions, low oxygen, failing engines, and overwhelming psychological pressure, no one could realistically regain control of a Boeing 737 that had already run out of fuel. In Andreas's hometown, He was buried alongside his girlfriend. Near the crash site in Athens, a memorial was built to honor the victims, including the flight attendants who bravely fought to the very end. Andreas's father described him this way: "He was not a coward. He was brave, courageous, and calm because his dream was to become a pilot."